So a new SpongeBob game came out last year, Titans of the Tide. It was made by Purple Lamp Studios. This is their third time now making SpongeBob games. It all started back in 2019 when THQ Nordic announced that they were going to be remaking Battle for Bikini Bottom. It's honestly kind of a miracle that a remake like that was greenlit, but regardless, its success enabled Purple Lamp to continue developing SpongeBob titles post the release of Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrated. So things were looking really good. Rehydrated sold really well. It sold like 1 million copies within its first few months, which I would consider that a success, especially for a licensed title in 2020. So, riding that high, Purple Lamp began developing a completely original spiritual successor to Battle for Bikini Bottom in the form of the Cosmic Shake. So Cosmic Shake drops in 2023 to mixed success. It averages around like a 7 out of 10 across various publications, IGN and all that stuff. And it has like a 70 on both sides of Metacritic. It's got like a 3.3 average on backloggd, very average game. Rehydrated fares similarly, but it has a slightly higher user score on Metacritic at like an 8.8. It's most likely higher on the user end because of its cult status. So that was a lot of scores, a lot of numbers. I'm bringing that up for a very specific reason, and that's because of the new title, Titans of the Tide. This game received higher scores over both Rehydrated and Cosmic Shake. So I've played all three of these games, including like hours upon hours of the original, and I feel like I'm going insane. Obviously, I would score it lower, but you know, it's not like scores and numbers are all that matters when it comes to experiencing a game, but I think it's a pretty good way to figure out how the public feels about a game, especially on something like Metacritic that has 2 ratings for, you know, user and critic. But basically, I feel like I have to say something, because Titans of the Tide is, compared to the past 2 games, being praised for what I would amount to a pretty mediocre experience. And I have a lot of thoughts about that, but before that, we gotta go back. So, Battle for Bikini Bottom. Battle was released in a very specific era for gaming, licensed Game City, and most of them were bad. They still sold though. They sold really well, sold like hotcakes. And that era kind of died off. Licensed games as a whole kind of fell off towards the end of the 6th generation of consoles. By the time the Xbox 360 and the PS3 came out, the general gaming audience skewed older with all the Call of Duties and the Halos and all that. It was a much more hardcore experience. A lot of these older licensed titles were forgotten about and kind of got buried for a while. For me, it was around the mid-2010s when I rediscovered Battle for Bikini Bottom. Here's a lore drop for you. I was going through some kind of phase around 2015 where I was playing all of my old games. So when I was younger, I wanted an Xbox to play Call of Duty. So I took a lot of my older GameCube and PS2 games to GameStop and was trading them in, trying to rack up enough store credit to buy an Xbox 360. I would have gotten a PS3 at the time, but that was around the time that PSN got hacked and the GameStop employee was kind of freaking out my mom, so I got an Xbox. So basically, all those games that I traded in are lost to time. I don't even remember the games that I gave up. One of them was Melee. I do remember that I traded in Super Smash Bros. And that is a decision that I regret. But anyway, I was 15 and I was all up in my feels about it. So I started playing what games I had left. And one of them was Battle for Bikini Bottom on GameCube. But around that time, I wasn't the only one replaying the game. There was also a small community that started speedrunning the game around 2013. I'm not going to do a summoning salt thing. I'm not going to go into a whole bit about it. But I will say, just around the time that I was getting back into it, the speedrunning scene kind of blew up when Shift set his first world record in 2016. Before, the record was tossed around a few times, being mostly dominated by a user named Cole, and there was another user named Fluff, who are still running games today, but have since abandoned running Battle, which is understandable. Shift is an absolute monster in running this game. No one has set a record above him, and he is still bringing down the times as of September of last year. There is a whole series of videos documenting the history of Battle for Bikini Bottom speedruns in so much more depth than I ever could, so I'm just gonna just go watch that. I watched like 30 minutes of it, but I'm gonna watch the rest of it because it was really interesting. I'll put it on while I'm cleaning or something. Anyway, speedrunning was very important in reviving Battle, and very well could have been the factor in THQ Nordic's decision to remake it. In 2018, THQ Nordic announced that they would be reviving several Nickelodeon game titles, including SpongeBob, but as of right now, they have only released SpongeBob games. So make of that what you will. But the real question is Battle for Bikini Bottom really that special? I'd argue it is. There's genuine heart put into this game, and it really comes through in kind of all aspects. There's definitely a nostalgia aspect to it, and be warned, this whole next section is going to be me kind of explaining why I like the game, might be glazing it a little bit, but also I'm a really big SpongeBob fan, so that's also gonna come through as well. With the modern gaming landscape, it's a buzzword for you, a collectathon is something that we don't really see much anymore. It's definitely built on the bones of games like Mario 64 and Banjo-Kazooie. And, for those of you who don't know, basically, in the game, you traverse various locations in a semi-open level fashion, collecting anything from shiny objects, Patrick's lost socks, golden spatulas, and really whatever else the game decides to send you on a quest for. There's usually an overarching objective that carries you through about 3 different zones inside of each level, with side objectives peppered throughout and plenty of little secrets and stuff scattered around. And this game oozes charm. The writing perfectly mimics the humor of SpongeBob prior to Steven Hillenburg leaving the show in 2004 after the release of the movie. It's that type of absurdist humor that also complements the usually contrived reasons you have to collect so many random objects in these kinds of platformers. For example, you're in downtown Bikini Bottom, and Mrs. Puff sends you to collect steering wheels. She explains that the robots attacking the town stole them and they need them back in order to evacuate. SpongeBob even brings up why they couldn't just drive in a straight line, and Mrs. Puff says that there are too many turns. And when you look at the level design, the entire map is a big grid full of turns. Wow, crazy stuff. It's that kind of synergy between writing and gameplay that this game does very well. The one time the story doesn't offer an explanation for why you need to collect a particular item, the game turns it into a joke. The robots in Rock Bottom stole artwork from the art museum, and instead of collecting it and returning it to the museum, you give them to Mrs. Puff. And when SpongeBob asks why she needs all the stolen artwork, she famously responds with this.
Why do you want all that artwork?
Don't ask questions you aren't prepared to handle the answer to.
Come on. That's hilarious. So, fast forward 20 years, Cosmic Shake comes out. Built off the bones of Battle for Bikini Bottom and its sister title, the SpongeBob movie game. And Cosmic Shake kind of obviously draws direct inspiration from Battle, deriving its level concepts from its predecessor. Each level in Cosmic Shake is a level from Battle with some wacky adjective. For example, Jellyfish Fields becomes Wild West Jellyfish Fields, and Goo Lagoon is Pirate Goo Lagoon. And I don't really take an issue with Cosmic Shake deriving its levels from Battle, because it changes them quite a bit to where you'd really only recognize them if you're intimately familiar with the original. Where I take issue is that Cosmic Shake is acting as this kind of continuation of this particular canon of SpongeBob games, but it doesn't really seem to understand what gives the games it's based on their appeal. I don't think Cosmic Shake is a bad game at all, but I do think that it's a little derivative and tends to slot into cliché when it's convenient. And by cliché, I mean tropes. It's got gaming tropes galore. It's already kind of a widespread meme right now that there are a lot of video game clichés that kind of pervade the industry.
Focus M.
Cosmic Shake includes quest markers. It has an objectives tab that's always on the side of the screen. It's got a really long opening sequence for a game that doesn't really need it. And on top of that, most obviously, SpongeBob has a glide move a la Breath of the Wild. It even has a little green wheel showing how long you're able to glide. And just to be clear, my beef isn't with the glide, but it's the reason it's included. It seems like ever since Breath of the Wild came out, games have to have glides in them. It feels like it was chosen mechanic first, and not for the reason that it serves in-game. In Breath of the Wild, the paraglider is a function of gameplay, allowing Link to slow his fall since Hyrule has so much verticality. A large part of the game is climbing up, viewing your surroundings, and then gliding down. On the Cosmic Shake side of things, it's a function of platforming that has already been solved for nearly 40 years in the form of the double jump. If you somehow don't know, a double jump is often implemented as a corrective move, either to add distance mid-air or correct an overshot jump. Anyway, it's a staple of really any game these days with robust platforming, And adding a glide on top of having a double jump is just kind of like putting a hat on a hat. And on top of that, the glide's functional purpose is to extend the player's airtime, right? Not to eliminate fall damage or what have you. It would be crazy if this 3D platformer had fall damage. What really gets me is there was already a similar function in the original Battle for Bikini Bottom that allowed you to slightly extend your air distance. You'll most commonly see this in speedruns of the game, but using SpongeBob's bubble spin attack in midair will give you just a brief boost to your jump distance, which is a pretty niche mechanic that just isn't replicated in the Cosmic Shake. The other thing, I don't want to gripe on it too hard, but the game is overly focused on the narrative, which is cute. The writing is good enough, but there's just so much of it. And going through a level, you are constantly being stopped so the game can redirect you towards the direction of the story. And the other thing, I don't really know where I'm going to put this probably when I'm talking about the story, but Cosmic Shake and Titans of the Tide, in an effort to kind of like do their own thing, have this really long setup to the inciting incident of the game, and it's just really confusing to me why they don't just resort to Plankton. Plankton is great shorthand to just make a conflict in SpongeBob happen, and it requires so minimal setup that you can get the person playing the game really quickly because it sets up the story very easily. Like it happens in Battle for Bikini Bottom, he makes a robot machine, robots attack the town, go fight robots. And especially in Cosmic Shake, where they go to Glove World and they meet Madame Cassandra, who is a very problematic portrayal of a Romani woman, and like the magic Neptunian bubble soap to like make the portal. It's like, it's really complicated in a way that like they could have just had Plankton make like a machine that makes portals to alternate universes and something goes wrong and now there's a bunch of like portals all over Bikini Bottom. It would have been easier to get the player playing the game sooner, and they wouldn't have had that problematic character, which they bring back in Titans of the Tide, but that's a whole other thing. You know, whatever. The game is much more linear than Battle, with less of a focus on exploration. Levels in Battle have one main goal with a bunch of side objectives and quests that you can complete. Cosmic Shake has side objectives, but you don't need to complete them to progress like you do in Battle. In Battle for Bikini Bottom, if you don't have golden spatulas, you don't beat the game. In Cosmic Shake, you just follow the path, and it'll take you to the end of the level. And that's not to say linear is bad. Linear is okay. It's something you see specifically in the SpongeBob movie game, which has a more linear design philosophy like the Cosmic Shake. The movie game still gates its progression behind collectibles, though. Throughout each level, you are guaranteed to collect a set number of Goofy Goober tokens, but at some point you're going to need to backtrack in order to collect extra tokens from side paths and other tasks in order to unlock certain abilities that you need to progress. If you're vigilant and collect optional tokens on your first run through of a level, there's less grinding later on in the game. Do I think that that's a particularly fun way to progress in a story-driven game? Not really, but the movie game keeps the spirit of a collectathon where you progress by collecting. Even if it's a dummy collectible currency scattered throughout the game, you still use it to purchase upgrades to your moves and to your health and things like that. This is where I'll give credit though. Cosmic Shake makes use of a hidden currency throughout the level very well. You can collect coins throughout the levels that you can use to buy costumes. And this is very unique to the Cosmic Shake as a game. The story concept is that SpongeBob has to go to all of these different alternate universe versions of Bikini Bottom to rescue his friends. But to access these worlds, he has to wear what they call cosmic costumes. And there's one for each level, but there are also additional costumes that you can unlock and purchase with the doubloons you collect throughout the game. And can the game get a round of applause for that? This is a great way to pay homage to like the myriad of costumes that SpongeBob has worn through the, nearly 30 years the show's been on the air. And it's a good reason to hunt down the collectibles. So basically, Cosmic Shake does some good stuff, and it does some not so good stuff. It's got cliches, but what game doesn't have cliches? What I'm trying to say is that there's just kind of a trend with certain games popularizing certain features, and they're just kind of put into games where they don't necessarily belong, or they kind of fail to do anything interesting or engaging with it. And like every genre and every era of gaming has its formulas, you know? We had the 2010 like open world nonsense, like the Ubisoft era of video games, where it was all empty worlds, meaningless collectibles, copy and paste side activities, and towers. Oh god, the towers. It was an era when developers decided to forego traditional level design for the sake of exploring a large open world just to really discover nothing. And now that we're out of that era, I think we're starting to see the impact and popularity of From Software's Souls titles that are starting to like take hold in the industry. Limited healing, strong enemies, centering boss fights, bonfire mechanics, and all this stuff are being pumped into like a new genre of Souls-likes to mixed success. There's some really good ones, there's some really not good ones. Some games like Stellar Blade end up creating a very unique gameplay aesthetic experience by taking elements from Nier Automata and hack and slash like ability-based combat from like a Devil May Cry or a Bayonetta and turning it into a pretty okay game. And then you have games like Hell Is Us that fundamentally misunderstand the Souls-like genre and are devoid of enemy variety. It entirely lacks boss fights and are purposefully obtuse for some greater sake of being for real gamers. And now, coming out of that tangent, that was a little dramatic, a little more dramatic than my opinions on Titans of the Tide. I don't feel that strongly about this game, although I do have opinions. This game takes most of its identity from the Cosmic Shake, separating itself even further from Battle for Bikini Bottom in design. The combat, I will say, is improved going from Cosmic Shake to Titans, but it is completely overhauled. Instead of SpongeBob having like a bubble spin for a melee attack, both SpongeBob and Patrick, who is now playable, are given 3-hit combos and dodge rolls. It's like they took the wrong lesson from the Cosmic Shake's abysmal combat. The main issue I have with the combat in that game is that all of the enemies with multiple hit points gain invincibility frames after their hit. In particular, there's one enemy that swings a bathtub around, and you can only hit them when they enter their Hit Me animation. And this goes for the enemy spawners as well, which emit a shockwave when you hit them that stuns you. This makes the combat incredibly slow and annoying, and Titans resolves this by making the combat much faster and allowing you to easily dodge enemy attacks. So this complexity of combat makes the standard enemy combat a little more bearable, but it doesn't extend to its boss design. All of the bosses are still very standard platformer bosses. They do a set amount of moves until they are obviously vulnerable and become invincible after you deal a set amount of damage. The boss design hasn't evolved at all and could be done with the same movement and attacks from a game released 20 years ago. So the game controls pretty well, it's very fluid. You're just not doing anything interesting. Kind of a backhanded compliment, but swapping between SpongeBob and Patrick on the fly and using them to complete little platforming sections is satisfying. The game is buttery smooth to control. Along with Patrick's new moves, his lasso and burrow moves give him the ability to move platforms and dive into geysers that act like bounce pads, but the game doesn't really introduce any new mechanics that weren't present in Cosmic Shake, and even excludes certain moves like SpongeBob's grapple. The one new gimmick that the game introduces is some kind of like jar of spectral goo. You can flip it between green and blue, hiding or revealing objects of the same color. It's introduced early on in the second level, and you will be doing it until the end of the game. It's repetitive, and they never really do anything creative with it. The game doesn't really have time to do anything creative in general. The game is much shorter than Cosmic Shake, and it really fails to innovate or iterate in any meaningful way. Titans also retreads a lot of the same ground as its predecessor. SpongeBob's karate kick and bubble projectile are lifted straight from Cosmic Shake. Assets are also recycled, like the karate balloons that are frequently used as platforming objects, and Patrick's ghost model is so clearly repurposed from his balloon form. Titans even includes costumes, with no purpose other than mimicking Cosmic Shake. And the game also has collectibles and currency, which you can use to buy the costumes, but you'll always have more than enough to buy whatever costume you want or any challenge levels that you want to play. So to me, it seems like with each iteration, Purple Lamp's SpongeBob titles lose charm and the timelessness of its blueprint in the form of Battle. It's a copy of a copy of a copy. Battle is definitely a product of its time, full of its own cliches and tropes, but it knows what it wants to do, and these newer games, which are so distinctly and clearly derived and inspired by Battle for Bikini Bottom, are just entirely uninterested in exploring that legacy and incorporating it into something new yet familiar. Each additional title boils down more and more of that initial spark that led to Battle's cult status in the first place. And there's not a more perfect metaphor than how Titans breaks down towards the end. Most of the game's levels are uninspired and have blank aesthetics and usually resort to a gray or green color palette, but by the end of the game, Bikini Bottom is almost completely destroyed, and not in a way that's visually interesting, but destroyed in the way that there's just not much there anymore. The entire level up until the end of the game is floating platforms in the void. Barely more visually striking than the challenge levels you can complete as side content. The last section, in the Fry Cook Museum, is like if you literally ripped away all of the things that immerse yourself in a game. It's like reading the script of a movie instead of watching it. And there's just such a lack of care that not only is it like visually numb, it even recycles the music from the title screen.
Here I come!
It's an unfortunate fate for SpongeBob, but I don't want to put this all on the developers. I don't think that they were malicious in making a mediocre SpongeBob game. They were very faithful to Battle when they remade it, and the Cosmic Shake was genuinely creative. And I don't think that that just goes away. I do have a pretty concrete theory though, as upsetting as it is. Looking at sales, Rehydrated sold around 1 million copies in its first few months, while Cosmic Shake only sold about 50,000 in its first month on Steam. Now I know that's not a full picture, but even if you multiply that number by the amount of platforms that the game is on, you get nowhere near 1 million. So it's a sharp decline if I've ever seen it. So I believe Cosmic Shake was given the green light after the success of Rehydrated. And when it didn't exceed expectations and bombed in sales, I think the higher ups got involved. They probably demanded something change for the next game. They probably mixed up the teams a little bit and almost definitely slashed the budget, which would explain all of the reused assets. And if that's the case, Titans was almost set up to fail, but I don't think the developers didn't care. I think it's much more likely an issue stemming from up top. It's nothing new to say, but this type of decision making hurts games, but this is yet another example. I don't know. I guess I'm disappointed. I kind of wish they went out on a high note with Cosmic Shake, but who knows? Maybe in 15 years, it'll be revered as a cult classic like its spiritual predecessor. I guess if I have anything left to say, is that unless there's some kind of uncompromised creative vision, please don't let there be another SpongeBob game.
Epilogue.
So there's quite a few SpongeBob games I excluded from talking about just because they weren't really relevant. They operate kind of outside this main lineage of SpongeBob game and offer their own interesting ideas. Mainly on the GameCube, there's the Unholy and the Unspeakable. We don't really talk about these games, unless I decide they're entertaining enough to talk about, but I would not get your hopes up. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed my kind of rant. I don't think that Titans of the Tide is necessarily an evil, irredeemable, awful experience. I just found it incredibly boring and uninspired, and honestly that offends me more than a bad experience. Just kind of felt like the gameplay equivalent of breaking even. And if you liked it, that's great. I'm surprised you got to this point. If I'm being 100% honest, I probably would have liked the game a lot more if it had anything close to approaching a soundtrack. The music in this game was just ambient at best. I could keep complaining about this game, but in the interest of not rambling and actually trying to organize my thoughts, I'm calling it quits.
Okay, Mrs. Puff, what's my final score?
6.
Woo!